Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke, and thank you for joining me. And if it's your first time, thanks for coming along. Really interesting conversation today with Kerstin Oberprieler. She is the co-founder and lead gamification designer at PentaQuest, because today what we're going to be looking at is gamification and innovation in government communication. Kerstin has a rich career in the advancement and education of gamification in Australia. She started her career here in Canberra at ThinkPlace, which is a leading design thinking agency, back in 2012. And during her role as executive design manager, she acquired a PhD from the University of Canberra, where she was able to look at gamification, design thinking, and education, and bringing all of that together. In 2016, she co-founded PentaQuest, a company that focuses on addressing organisational culture and performance challenges through the application of sophisticated, intuitive, and elegant gamified products. She joins me in the studio now. Kerstin, thank you very much for joining me on GovComms.
Thank you for having me.
Gamification is it's one of those things, isn't it? It's really, you're hearing people saying, in this world where it is so hard to grab people's attention and hold people's attention, you have to do much better than just an image, just a video. You've really got to go deeper, to capture that attention. Is that your experience, and is that why that you are pursuing this career that you have in gamification in government comms?
Yeah, really, really good question. So you hit the nail on the head that the way that we engage people is based on very traditional methods, whether it's communication or our citizens or our teams and employees. And so gamification is about a new way of engaging people. So for people that haven't heard what it is, some people think I made the term up. I didn't. It's a thing. But basically it's using game mechanics and experience design and combining those to address a problem in the real world. So a game mechanic are the things that make games so much fun. So we see people spending hours and hours of time being really engaged, really enthused with games, and gamification came about by looking at how can we capture even a fraction of that engagement and that complete focus and apply it to non-entertainment things.
So give me an example of how you would assemble a solution in this space.
Yeah. So the very first thing that you need to do is really understand who are your users and what are you trying to get them to do or to know. So what is your behavioural and what is your learning outcome? And it sounds kind of obvious, but you may be surprised how often people can overlook that step or rush that step. Because gamification works when you've tailored it specifically to your users and to that context. The very first step is understanding who are your users, what motivates them, and what is it that you'd like them to do.
And how much work do you need to do to actually get that understanding?
It depends on what level of scale you're trying to gamify at. If you're trying to gamify, say, an event or a bit of like an exhibition or something where people are interacting with it for a moment, it's less. If you're trying to change an organisation of thousands of people, that takes a bit longer. So It depends on the challenge.
And that's an interesting one around, say, a large organisation where there are thousands of people, where there are people of different ages, of different interests, of different capabilities. How do you go about designing a solution for a diverse group such as that?
It's a really important question, especially we do a lot of work with teams and organisations on how to use gamification to engage, to motivate, to reward and recognise your employees. And like I said, it starts with understanding your users. Then you go into choosing the mechanics that would work well based on their context and what they're used to. So an example is if you have a very collaborative environment where the team is very cohesive and you try to add a fully competition-based experience, it's not going to work so well because it doesn't work in that environment. But if you do have an environment that works quite well in competition, then the mechanics match that quite well. So once you've identified who they are, you've identified which mechanics work, then you go about doing a design and agile process to design it. And so that involves testing early and often with users and throughout the process before you release it.
So you reference these mechanics. What are they? What's a game mechanic?
So the most simple mechanics that people will be familiar with are things like points, badges, leaderboards. So they're basically the components of the game. But there's hundreds and hundreds of them, and the way you kind of put them together is what creates a gameplay. So if you think of Monopoly, some of the mechanics in that would be, well, I've got a token, I have a turn, and there's some die. Every time I throw the die, I move the thing. There's a currency and things like that. So it's basically the components that make up that experience.
Okay. How do you make it compelling? How do you use the mechanics to make, to grab someone, to hold them? How is it that you're able to do that? And indeed, how is it that you can transfer knowledge and understanding such that people, the people who've asked you to come up with the solution, get value from the investment that they make?
Yeah, so again, it comes back to what the purpose of the gamification is. If it's knowledge, you want to be, if it's acquiring knowledge or practicing knowledge, you want to make sure again that that's fitting in with people's lives or with their work. So if you're engaging citizens, it looks different to when you're engaging employees, looks different to when you're engaging kids, whatever it might be. So it's part of what you work out there.
Yeah, right. So can you give me some examples perhaps of gamification solutions that you've designed and the process that you went through and the problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah. Well, I might start with a simple example that most people will be familiar with, which is things like your Fitbit or your Apple Watch.
Yeah.
So they use elements of gamification to get you to exercise more often, with friends, all this sort of thing. So so some of the mechanics in that is, you've got your goal, which is your 10,000 steps a day.
Right.
A lot of people will be doing September as well at the moment. That's using some game mechanics in there as well. Team challenges, the purpose of raising money for a charity, that's all part of that. In terms of some of the solutions we've designed for government, we're working with a department at the moment to develop a platform that rewards professional development. So using gamification to recognise and reward people for things like reading resources, policies and strategies that come out, attending networking events, doing all your L&D and all those things that you need to be doing, getting feedback from your manager, a whole range of different behaviours.
And so what does a gamification team look like? How many people does it take to to create and launch and monitor a game?
Yeah, so there's a whole range of teams that a whole range of skills that make up the team. There's the gamification or the behavioural psychologist. So there's a lot of psychology and design and behavioural economics that goes into making this. So you've got the designers there. You also need project managers, client liaison type of thing. Making sure that project's running on time. If it's a digital product, you obviously need software engineers as well. So visual designers is another important one because often there's a visual component to it. So those are probably the main ones.
Okay.
And then how large the team is depends on how large the project is.
And then how sophisticated the graphics have got to be? Does that soak up a lot of resource?
Yeah, it can. So a common misconception when we say gamification is people go, "Oh, are you making me play Angry Birds at work?"
Yeah.
Or am I playing World of Warcraft? And gamification doesn't need to feel very game-like. It absolutely can, but it can feel more like if you think of your frequent flyer program, you wouldn't really have thought of that as a game ever. But if you look at it, there's points, there's levels, there's status, there's rewards. So they're actually starting to use mechanics to nudge your behaviour. And obviously what they're trying to get you to do is fly more often with the same airline for longer. So it can kind of range from something that feels more traditional, professional, like your frequent flyer, all the way to something that feels very game-like and has a lot of graphics. So obviously if you're building something that's got a very rich visual interface, there's graphics, there's worlds, there's characters that you interact with, there's a lot more resource in that. But again, it doesn't have to be, and it's where on that scale you sit. Again, depends on your audience.
Where would you locate the maturity scale for gamification, particularly in government and the public sector? Where Where is it? Is it very early days for gamification?
It is. So it's an emerging field. It's been around for close to a decade, but it is still evolving and maturing, as you say, which makes it also quite exciting. In terms of government, government is interested. They are using it already. There's a couple of great examples, in recent years and today as well. But it is still new. It's still exploratory, and part of it is because people don't quite understand what it is, and there's some misconceptions around, how it's used.
Yeah, and I suppose getting budget for things that are perhaps in the experimental basket may be a little bit difficult as well, where there's not loads of evidence that if you take this particular approach, you're going to get an outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the way that often government clients work with us is they kind of start small, and it might be a short piece or a workshop to explore, what is this? How could we use it? Here's our challenge. Let's come up with some ideas for how we could use it, and kind of do a staged process that way.
Okay. So earlier this year here in Australia, the E-Safety Commission released The Lost Summer, which was an educational mobile app designed to educate young Australians on digital intelligence, and it focused on respect, critical thinking, resilience, responsibility, and empathy. Did you see that app in particular? And if so, how do you think it worked?
So yeah, definitely have had a look. I think it's a really great example of how we can use a different approach to engage your citizens. And so that interface, for people that haven't seen it, is quite playful. So it's more that you've got a character. It's very narrative-based gameplay where you can make decisions, you can talk to characters and complete quests and things like that. So that's on the more playful scale. And I think it was beautifully designed. It's a really great example. And yeah, I guess that's an example of the more playful side.
Sure.
And I think because the audience is young people, people kind of go, yeah, of course, young people need games. And feel very comfortable taking that approach, I guess.
Yeah. Where to from here do you see for the future of gamification? Where are things going to move?
So I really see gamification becoming the new norm and the new way to engage people, whether it's your citizens, your students, your employees, whoever. So we're already seeing more and more game mechanics being used with just the products and companies and brands that we interact with every day. So I really see it becoming a more mainstream way of engaging people, because it does have the ability to engage people, cut through all the noise that we experience every day, and also have the potential to nudge behaviour. And I see it being used not just for knowledge and learning, but also things like collectively achieving great things like environmentally sustainable behaviours, fitness, health, mental well-being, a whole range of different applications there.
But certainly a lot of applications on phones never get opened, never get used. So how do you make sure that yours isn't the one that just ends up, loaded once, perhaps maybe used once and then not used again? How is it? What's the trick to making sure that they get used over and over?
So the way that you make something a habit is when you integrate it with everyday life. So if you look at your Fitbit or your Apple Watch, they're integrated very well because they're using a wearable. I've got a watch, I'm used to using it, and that sort of thing. And so again, when we talk about games, they can be quite discrete times when people interact with them, and they often have a bit of a hype and then a cool down sort of period. With gamification, especially if we're looking at workplaces, it becomes integrated with it's a new way of working, so it becomes integrated with what you do.
Okay, well listen, that's fascinating, and where do you think you're going to be working in more into the future, into the next, say, 12 to 18 months to 2 years? Where are the areas that are going to provide you the best opportunities?
So there's, you mean in government or in general?
No, in government.
In government.
Yeah.
So there's certainly a lot of interest in the team space. So how do you encourage and motivate your workforce? So that's definitely part of it. And also engaging with people. So, as government, you need to provide a lot of information and often that can be too much information. So people often, go to the website trying to find something out and get greeted with a wall of text, and they get overwhelmed and don't intake that information. So I see gamification as a way that you can actually make that information stick in people's minds, because you've designed an experience that's inherently engaging, and having them learn the information and really integrate it with what they know.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much for coming in, Kerstin. That's fascinating. I think it's going to be... you explained it in such a compelling, thoughtful, clear, understanding way. I'm sure lots of people will be thinking about that and thinking about, okay, this is the problem. This is the person, that focus that you need to have on a particular audience, and then thinking, okay, well, maybe this is a tool. This is a new tool.
Yeah, do something different.
In this ever-evolving world of GovComms that we work in, there's so many options, so many choices, so many solutions, so much promise from, the ubiquitous intelligent technologies that are but everywhere. But this will find a place, because I'm fascinated. I'm not a gamer, and I suppose this is Twitch is at the other end, but I do... I'm fascinated by some of the cultural elements and the cultural change that we're seeing with, massive stadiums being packed out, where people are coming along to watch, Team A versus Team B in the World Championship of World of Warcraft or whatever. Yeah. And, there's professional leagues in the United States. And so it's a thing.
Absolutely.
It's a big thing, and I think that it's probably at the mainstream level sort of below the surface at the moment. But when you look at the scale, when you look at the size, when you look at the reach, when you look at the growth, it's really something that people have to keep their mind on and their eyes on, to see how could it be used. How can we adapt that? How can we change that? Because I think that's the great opportunity at the moment, isn't it? Is it where we can learn, we can see where things are evolving, where they're going, and then keeping our eyes open to think, okay, maybe that's some way that we might be able to. There's something that we can use. So, listen, if people are interested and want to know more about you, where can they find out a little bit more about you?
So they can hop onto the website www.pentaquest.io, or they can email me as well, Kerstin, so Kerstin @pentaquest.io.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for coming in today, and thanks to you, the audience, for coming back once again to listen to that compelling conversation there with Kerstin. It really, I think, for the first time, maybe I do understand what gamification is. I always thought it was, down the other end, but, it really is that, and that notion of mechanics, of those simple things of habit, of trying to involve people in ways of reward and recognition and understanding, and connect that to learning. I think that's really interesting as well, as to how do you build capability, because I think that's one of the big challenges for government, is how do they continue to improve, and how do they start people, but then how do they get them to complete tasks, because that's another challenge for people, particularly with online education, where there's such a huge amount of wastage, where people get started but never come back. So anyway, thanks for coming back once again. I'll be back at the same time next week, but for the moment, it is bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.